Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Monster Hunter Wilds. As you can imagine, the weapon that I focused on the most while I was over there at Gamescom playing Monster Hunter Wilds was, without a shadow of a doubt, the Gunlance. That is my main weapon. That is the weapon for which I have the highest level of expectation, particularly after that super amazing weapon overview that we got, which made it look like an absolute powerhouse. So in today's video, I'm going to be focusing on breaking down all of the new things that you can do with the Gunlance, some of the new combos, some of the new abilities, and some of the just really cool stuff that you can do. But before we get started with that, I should mention that this B-roll might not be the best because basically this is B-roll of me still practicing with the weapon, learning a bunch of stuff. And also, shout out to CaoSlayer, with whom I got to discuss the weapon during his capture session. It was pretty awesome, and I actually learned quite a few things from him as well. So make sure to check out his content. There's going to be a link in the description below for all you Gunlance fans out there. Do make sure to subscribe to him because he's going to be breaking down the weapon even further, and he just has like a really good understanding of the weapon. I would actually say maybe even better than mine, but still, I still want to talk about it. So let's get into it. One of the first things that changes with the Gunlance is it now has two Wyvern fire charges that we can use back to back, and they're actually integrated with one of the combos of the Gunlance, which is pretty badass, and that is actually one of the things that I don't have in my footage because I only realized you could do that after I recorded the footage and I started looking at the combo trees. Because like when you're on the show floor and you're recording, you're very conscious of like, oh, I only have this amount of time, I have to make sure that I capture as much footage as possible, and you're not necessarily looking at the combos on the upper right hand side because there's so much stuff happening around you. But you know, it is what it is. So we have two Wyvern fire charges on the Gunlance now, which is pretty cool. You can Wyvern fire back to back, but also Wyvern fire now charges with shelling, not just with time. Now in previous Monster Hunter games, after you did a Wyvern fire, you would have to wait, I think it's about 2 minutes, and then if you get 3 artillery, it's only 90 seconds, give or take, and then eventually your Wyvern fire comes back, and then you can Wyvern fire again. That's not going to be the case here. Now there is time, so if you wait, it eventually comes back, but also if you just keep shelling, it also comes back. And the more you shell, the faster you get Wyvern fire back. And I know, right now, everybody that is a Gunlance main is hearing this and they're going like, wait, what? You got a big old smile on that face of yours. I know it. I friggin' know it because that's exactly how I felt, which is pretty friggin' sweet. So 2 Wyvern fire charges, and Wyvern fire now charges with shelling. Now, one of the things that they did remove is that we can no longer go full burst into stake. You can go into stake after you do wide sweep, or after you do one of these new Wormstake full blast combos, which we'll talk about in just a second, but you can no longer just go, you know, slam, blast, stake. That doesn't work anymore, which is a bit of a shame. I wish they would have kept that one. And again, this isn't the final version of the game, so this might still change, or maybe even different shelling styles might have different moves. We don't actually know. The only thing that we had access to in this particular build was a normal shelling Gunlance, so I can't talk too much about anything else other than that. So, basically whenever you do the wide sweep this time around, which by the way, you get to wide sweep by just doing your straight up melee combo, so it goes like 2 pokes and then wide sweep. I actually don't remember if you go like, if you do the running poke, it's another poke and wide sweep, or it's 2 pokes still. I think it's running poke, and then 2 pokes, and then wide sweep, but I actually could be wrong. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, very quickly you get the wide sweep. Even if you just mash triangle, it will be 2 pokes wide sweep. And wide sweep is actually what unlocks the new combo, which is called Wormstake Full Blast or something like that. And Wormstake Full Blast, what does that do? That is when your hunter basically goes with the Gunlance, he does like the diagonal move with the brrrah. Now immediately after that move, if you keep pressing triangle, he's going to stab somebody, and then after that, he's going to do a quick reload, and then you keep mashing triangle, and he does another one diagonal, one down, and then you can go another Wormstake, and after that, you can still combo into 2 Wyvern fires that actually charge faster than if you use your Wyvern fire without doing it from this combo, which is pretty badass, but at the same time, it's a fairly lengthy combo, so you got to keep that in mind. Now, you can still full burst, but the idea here is your wide sweep is actually going to be a little better. It all depends on your opening timers, right? So if you have enough time to do like the full Wormstake full blast and then the multi-Wormstake full blast, which is the follow-up to that, then you might want to go for that. But otherwise, you might want to go, I'll just go, you know, full burst. But you can still get to wide sweep after full burst. So what's going to happen if you try doing the Wormstake full blast combo? Basically, he's going to do the movement, but it's not going to do the full blast animation because you don't have any shells, right? But then it still does the stake, and then it reloads, and then you get the diagonal down full blast. So that's another thing that you can do. And because you guys are wondering how you do this Wormstake combo, because that was one of the things that took me a little while to understand. It's basically every time after wide sweep, you press triangle, circle, or whatever equivalent happens to be on an Xbox controller or on your keyboard and mouse. But basically, it's the same thing that you would usually press to get your downward sweep after the lunging upper thrust. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Up, down. You do triangle, circle, whatever you do for that is the same thing that you do, but after your wide sweep combo, and it just goes straight into this, which appears to be right now the most powerful combo of the Gunlance from what I can tell, which is really, really good. Now, there are several ways to get to wide sweep like we talked about. You get into it after 2 pokes. You can also do it after shell dodge. So now we have the whole thing where we can do shell dodging, where you just press a direction, press shell, and your character kind of does a little hop. You can do this backwards, forwards, sideways, in whatever direction you want. And you can also use focus mode to reposition yourself whilst also using shell dodging so that you can kind of like constantly realign yourself towards the monster if that's something that you want to do. You know, there are other videos where I go into more detail about focus mode, but basically focus mode for the Gunlance is very useful because you can constantly reposition yourself sideways. It basically allows you to strafe around the monster, which is very useful if you're a Gunlance main. I'm sure that you can imagine, oh, this is actually really cool. And you can not only strafe using that, but you can also do your shell dodge. But after your shell dodge, you can go into wide sweep, which then opens you up to do the Wormstake full blast into the multi-Wormstake, which is really, really good because you can use the shell dodge to kind of like position yourself, and you might be missing 1 or 2 shells whenever you're getting ready to do your full blast, but still you gain the ability to position yourself whilst shelling at the same time, and then you go into wide sweep, from which you can go into Wormstake, or you can go into Wormstake full blast and then go into multi-Wormstake and follow up with all of those things, which is really, really nice. You can also get into wide sweep, like I've already mentioned, after a full burst, so you know that's another thing. In terms of like your aerial abilities, they remain pretty much the same from what I could tell. You know, you jump off of a ledge. If you do your lunging thrust, you're gonna, you know, jump off the ledge and do a slam down, which you can combo into a full burst, and that opens up into all of the things that it usually does. You can also just jump off of it with your weapon unsheathed, and you can do an aerial full burst, just like you do in Monster Hunter World. And by the way, aerial full burst is your dismount attack. The way that you do a dismount attack is you're on Sacred, you press triangle and circle, you'll get a dismount attack. This is a universal thing for all weapons. Every weapon has their own version of a dismount attack, and the one in the Gunlance just happens to be the aerial full burst, which is still the one where he just kind of like does horizontal sweep with the Gunlance, slaps the monster, and at the same time unloads all shells just like that. Another very interesting thing, which I don't think I have a single example in my B-roll, is that charged shells, and again, keep in mind that this is a normal shelling Gunlance, but charged shells, now, if you charge them all the way, it will unload all of the shells, which is pretty cool, particularly if you take into consideration, like, oh, what if I happen to do that with, you know, a wide shelling Gunlance or a long shelling Gunlance? I think long shelling charged shells and unloading all the shells at once is going to be an absolutely devastating playstyle. That's even assuming that we still have those types of differences, which I believe there are going to be different shelling styles, but I don't know if it's going to be normal, long, and wide, or if they're changing that. We know that normal's in the game because that's the Gunlance that we have available right now. But other than that, we don't know what else is going to happen, so do keep that in mind. But yeah, charge shells unload all of the shells at once, so it's almost like a full burst, basically, that you can kind of like charge. Initially, when I first saw the footage, it almost looked like when you're charging shells, you can block. That's not the case. You cannot block while charging shells. It is what it is. Now, another really cool thing that we get is with all of these crazy reloads that we're doing with the Gunlance, it seems like all of them have a guard point. At least that's the vibe that I get, which is really cool. Again, only the quick ones, not the slow one. The slow reload where it actually folds the Gunlance, does all of that. That one does not have a guard point. However, quick reloads all have guard points. And by the way, with those guard points, you can still parry, which is really, really cool. Which brings us over to parrying. The way the parrying works in this game is whenever you bring up your block, and again, we don't know if there's going to be switch skills or anything like that, but of the build that we've played, basically parrying is just a regular ability that you hold block, and there's a little window, which if you block at the very last second, you parry. So what does parry give you access to? You gain access to 3 attacks that you can do after a parry. You can either overhead smash, you can shell, or charge shell if you want to. I don't know if you charge shell after a parry if it charges faster, but I imagine it would because it's listed on the combo list, and that appears to be what happens. So for instance, at the end of the Wormstake full blast attack, which I was saying, which is the one where he goes like brrrah, brrrah, stakes and all of that stuff, the Wyvern fire charges faster. So I would imagine if the Wyvern Fire shows up after a parry, that would also be the faster version of Wyvern Fire, but I didn't really get to test this. And I would imagine that if you're doing charged shells, those will likely also charge faster, or your other option is just the overhead smash into full burst. That is the other thing that you can do. Or you can even just go overhead smash into wide sweep, so that you can then go into the Wormstake full blast, which is still one of the most powerful things that you can do with the Gunlance. The other thing is power clashes. The way the power clashes work, you just have to keep blocking the monster, and then eventually you will get a power clash. Probably you'll get power clashes faster if you parry, but don't quote me on that. That's just a theory that I have right now, and because of the limited time that I had to play the game, I can't really confirm or deny this at this point. That requires way more thorough testing. But that's the vibe that I got. I felt like the more I was popping off perfect parries, the more it was likely that I would get power clashes. But it's also important to mention that only certain monster attacks will lead to a power clash. If you guys don't know what the power clash is, you know, in that first official trailer, not the reveal trailer, the first trailer where they finish in the scene where the hunter just has a great sword and he's blocking the monster with his mouth, that's a power clash. Only weapons that can guard can do power clashes, so keep that in mind. And the power clash of the Gunlance is exactly what I wanted, by the way. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things ever in any Monster Hunter game. Monster comes in with a big bite attack, you block it with your big-ass shield, and then as the monster is, you know, you're struggling with the monster and you're mashing the button, what happens is your hunter just goes, okay, quick reload, stabs the monster in the face, unloads all the shells directly into the monster's throat. It's glorious! It is one of the most manly things you can do in Monster Hunter. I friggin' love it. It's amazing. And then the other thing that we have with the Gunlance is obviously the focus strike. So doing wounds is pretty much like I predicted. I talked about this in my previous video. You just attack the monster. You get wounds from just attacking the monster. You only need to go into focus mode to do wounds. Focus mode basically just allows you to aim your attacks a little bit better and see whether or not the monster has wounds. So, you know, it gives you a couple of movement options. It's not this easy mode that everybody's making it out to be at the beginning, pretty much like I thought it wasn't. But basically, whenever there's a wound in a monster, you press L2 and tap R1. You don't even have to like be in focus mode. Oh, I have to change my stance to focus mode to go into focus. No, you just tap L2 and R1 and boom, Bob's your uncle. You do the attack. You gotta make sure that you hit the monster in the wound when you do a focus strike. Otherwise, you know, the focus strike is not really effective, so it's kind of like a waste of damage, really. But the focus strike for the Gunlance is freaking awesome. It's the drill thing that you see. He goes on, he pulls out a, you know, he folds the Gunlance, and then the Wormstake starts spinning, and he just starts stabbing the monster with a Wormstake. And then at the end of it, you plunge the Wormstake into the monster, You remove the Gunlance, the Wormstake explodes, tons of damage, wound breaks, you get the monster break part. Friggin' amazing. Love it. Now, the other thing also is naturally the mounted combat. Mounted combat is different. I've talked about it. You can now do knife attacks, you can do fast knife attacks, or you can do weapon attacks. The weapon attack of the Gunlance is you basically, thrust against the part of the monster that you're in, and you unload a shell. That's kind of like the weapon attack, which is pretty good. Once you have wounds, you basically get to finish it with your focus strike on a mount, which is pretty badass. I did it on Doshiguma's head, and yeah, very, very satisfying. But overall, I'm absolutely loving what the Gunlance is looking like. I also had confirmation from the developers that things are going to be different with the Gunlance this time around. I asked a very specific question in my interview where I said, like, hey, there's a ton of Gunlance that don't reach max shelling level. It kind of sucks because nobody wants to use those Gunlances. What's the deal? And yeah, you guys should watch the interview. But basically, if what the developers have told me ends up being correct, we should have a lot more viable Gunlances at the end of the tree this time around, and I'm pretty friggin' excited about that. But for now, that's going to be it. If you guys enjoyed this video, do hit the like button. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, subscribe, bell notification icon, all of that jazz. Peace out.